Welcome to Your Next Chapter, where we feature conversations with leading audio creators and industry experts shaping the future of podcasting. I'm Jeremiah Tittle, CEO of Next Chapter Podcasts and your host for insightful conversations that delve into the creative processes, challenges, and innovations driving the world of audio storytelling. And really excited for the guest for this episode. Our guest is Bryan Barletta, the founder of Sounds Profitable, the leading trade association for the podcasting business. Bryan, welcome to the show.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's great to be able to meet you in this way. I look forward to, in the flesh, shaking your hand and be able to meet at one of these conferences and at the podcast show in London or otherwise. But, let's get to it. The current state of podcasting is, you're the perfect guy to talk to about this. The premise of our show is actually that the podcasting has gone through a market correction. That's the way we, as I say, lovingly call it. I do acknowledge the slew of layoffs, percentages of giant companies like Spotify and beyond, and with a lot of losses in the podcast department. And maybe that means there's a lot more independents out there like me and what we're doing here at Next Chapter. But I've also seen the growth that has continued throughout, and there's different metrics for that. But I'd say like the rumors of its demise have been greatly exaggerated in my humble opinion. How do you view this valley in the peaks and valleys of the podcast industry story?
I think we're almost at the leveling out side of it. I think that we're close to the bottom of the correction. And I don't mean bottom in like a negative. I mean ready to go forward in the upswing. I think there's still probably a few more consolidations, a few more companies probably not being as active. There are people that just didn't see the writing on the wall, didn't adjust their business plan. When there was massive growth, they just kept projecting that would go on forever. And especially the hard stance that I really have is we really have done pretty terrible by the creators, the true creatives in podcasting, because they went from these people that were doing other jobs and then able to build into audio or do more there to being given large staffs and large budgets. And then one day it was just pulled away from them, right? We didn't really explain the business side. So when those people have lost their roles and their jobs, that correction hasn't I don't think it's fully resolved yet. I think we're almost at that settling phase, but we're starting to see all the signs of us increasing and growing in a stable, consistent percentage year over year.
Yeah, there's kind of the haves and have-nots. I spent the majority of my career in radio. I'm sure the same could be applied for TV. But, at a local radio station, like when I got my start in DC, you had your morning show guys making more than $1 million a year. And then you had me making whatever the minimum or below that before I joined the union. I think it's very true. So we're not worried about Dick Wolf. We're not worried about some of the people who got these, big podcasting deals necessarily bringing their storytelling prowess to this industry. I'm just curious, how healthy is the current podcast ad market in your opinion?
I think it's really healthy. I mean, I think there's a fix with iOS 17, and it's important to call it a correction and a fix because in iOS 15 numbers were inflated because of a bug in Apple Podcasts that took 2 years to identify. And I think that there was some pushback on that. CPM rates changed in reflection of that. Publishers, some publishers are very vocal about not making the same amount of money, and I understand that. But the money coming in continues to grow. The advertisers that are coming in are sticking around better than they have previously, and there's more new advertisers entering the space. Not everybody is catching them. I mean, I think that we are still an industry that's mostly people that this is their first advertising medium. This is their first content medium. This is the first technology medium as a job and a career. So I think that some of the smaller companies aren't particularly positioned well to get those new and interesting dollars. They're just kind of getting from the people that are already in the space. And sometimes when you don't innovate, your revenue can go down because it's less interesting. You didn't add more inventory to make up for the loss from the iOS 17 correction. You didn't find what people are looking for and trying to buy. You didn't work with your publishers to improve their how they convert on campaigns or the types of audience that they're collecting and they're really resonating with. So I think objectively, the ad market is continuing to grow, and it's better than it was last year. And it will continue to see single to low double digit growth year over year. But I think that there are a handful of people that it was just easy to take inbound inquiries and have a business off of it, and are now finding difficulties in getting out there and justifying why dollars should go to them.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of when I go to Podcast Movement and other conferences, I love listening to Tom Webster and what
I've heard of him.
Yeah, he's one of the bells of the ball of these events. But when he's putting out the collaborative report on what in the advertising market is unique about podcasting, I mean, yeah, you could say I hear what I want to hear, but I think there's a lot of malaise or boredom as linear streams of TV, et cetera, and you're watching your favorite show or listening something on terrestrial radio, and you may not be as activated to to want to buy from a particular sponsor. But podcasting is very different in that regard. It's very unique. So I think that's something that has always encouraged me that we're in the right space. We're betting on the right horse here. That consumers, people, the affinity, the diehards of a particular podcast, they're there because they chose it. It wasn't some accidental linear stream that they fell into. Typically,
yeah. I think Tom likes to highlight, and I support this too, that there's three waves of podcast listeners, right? There's the people who are there for the technology, right? It's been around for 20 years. They bought into the idea of podcasting, the idea of open distribution, and super exciting. And there's people that were there for the show, think Serial and those time periods. I think even now we're introducing people on the idea of a concept, right? Someone's searching, they want to learn more about weight loss drugs or something like that. They're finding a single topic and listening to it. Sometimes they'll go to more podcasts. Sometimes they'll stick with that podcast. Sometimes they'll bounce off. And so we're just trying to figure out audience wise, like who we can capture and how. And I think it's important, even the people that bounce off, we got them. We got them even for a little bit, right? I don't know about your behavior, but like we have a 3 and a 6-year-old. They're not on YouTube or YouTube Kids or anything like that. Every streaming service that we have in our household is ad free. And I do subscribe to some ad-free podcast solutions, but not for the ad-free, for the bonus content, right? For the additional on there. So a substantial amount of my podcast consumption has ads in it. And that might be outside of, I would say, web, the only place that I actually can be reached by advertisers. And we make great money. We're in Portland, Oregon. We're a family. There's so many people in my household to sell to. There's so many brands to get my kids aware of. And podcasting can sometimes be the only way to get in front of people like me. So I'm excited for it. And some of the stuff you talked about with Tom, we have research on that, by the way, at soundsprofitable.com. All of that research is completely free. We currently don't even ask for your information when you download it. It's the largest publicly available survey of podcast listenership in the US. Love for people to check it out. But that's a lot of what you're talking about is supported in that research.
I love that. No, and I'm excited to dive in further with Sounds Profitable. I would love to know a little bit more about your origin story there. How did it come together? Where did you come from prior to launching this?
Yeah, it's always interesting. I think that to share the story. I mean, the first thing is I think a lot of people in their career development path are always shy to talk about being fired or let go or other things like that. And I'm not. I mean, I'm unapologetically who I am. It has led to some firings in my career. It has led to some growth, and it's led to Sounds Profitable. And so I've been working in advertising technology for about 16 years. The first half of it was in mobile apps. So everything from like reviewing apps to working in the advertising space on there. It's been very fun. And then about halfway through my career, I was at a company that had an attribution product, and WNYC and Progressive said, we do attribution on the web. Can we do it on podcasting? The sales guy said, yeah. And I hit mute and I said, what are you doing? And that's how Barometric came to be. That was acquired by Claritas, and we brought attribution into podcasting. And then I went over to Megaphone, and I was over there as senior product manager of data and monetization. And I had the hard job of digging into the ad server and the data pipeline. And the problem there is they were starting to sell to Spotify, and I don't take hints very well. So you can't really sell a house while someone's ripping up a carpet. So they let me go in August of 2020, and we had my first kid. My oldest son, Theo, was 2 years old. We were trying for a second kid. We had just bought a house very recently. It was in the middle of the pandemic. It was August 2020. I had the opportunity. James Cridlin gave me space to write, and I realized that so many people in the space weren't educated on all aspects of it, especially on the technical or things like that. The difference between a download, a listen, and a stream, there's no streaming in podcasts. It's progressive downloads. Listen data is app unique data that Spotify and Apple and Amazon Podcasts or Amazon Music can share. So we just started writing, and it kind of snowballed. And I think it really took off when Tom Webster joined about 2 years ago. And so Tom Webster is the face of research in podcasting. He's the pioneer at Edison Research for 18 years, leading infinite dial, share of ear, super listeners, and architecting that and presenting that data. And he came over 2 years ago to focus fully on podcasting. We're talking on November 5th right now. This is Tom's first election where he hasn't had to do election work, because Edison does more than podcasting, and Tom really wanted to focus on just podcasting. And somewhere around when Tom came on board, we went from just being like a consulting firm and newsletter to being a trade association. We really leveled it up. We don't take equity advisory or board seats in any company. We don't work on commissioner kickback. We sign MNDAs with all of our partners. And that's how we're able to work with 185 partners and growing to better this space. Everything is a flat rate. There's no added costs if you're a larger company or anything like that. And our goal is how do we help podcasting within its own ecosystem, but then how do we push into new spaces? We bought a whole day at South by Southwest to prove to them that they should do their own track. And supposedly in 2025, they'll have an official podcast track.
Come on.
Pushed Advertising Week, right? Yeah, we pushed Advertising Week to have a day about podcasting this year. Their 20th anniversary, they had a standalone podcast day. It was packed, most of the panels there. We're really just trying to convince these people that have this space that podcasting will show up if you give a price appropriate space for us and make it accessible to see how the value it is there. Because a lot of people don't have big money to spend like they do in CTV and retail media and all that. So we're using that value of that partnership, that how we're integrating with all these people, the big names that we're working with and the small ones too, to say, give us space and we'll show you that it's worthwhile making room for podcasting. And so it's been fun. It's been a little over 4 years. September was 4 years. I did not expect to start a company. I hope this is my last company. It's a lot. It's a lot more than I anticipated, but I will never have an opportunity like this to help an industry ever again.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love hearing the story directly from you. I mean, I've heard bits and pieces, but it's cool to hear. And I think I'm also in that can't take a hint category as well, because if it wasn't for me getting the axe from TuneIn, then I wouldn't have started this company 6 years ago. This past July we celebrated, and I mean, it's been a roller coaster, but I'm also just really bullish on the industry. I mean, and it's great to talk to you and get your kind of breakdown of it. You brought up the election. We talked about Tom. Happy for him that he's not, pulling his hair out today.
Because it's great hair. Like, I want him to keep that in check. We need him on stage with that beautiful head of hair.
Yeah, we got to get a sponsorship from some hair product for him, some protein, Pantene or something. But I was curious how you view, and this I think is very much a success story or a endorsement, a moment in time when these presidential candidates are making appearances on podcasts. I used to thumb my nose at this industry before I am fully, drinking the Kool-Aid every day. But when you have these candidates, making appearances on these popular podcasts, I mean, and the VPs, like, it is mandatory appearances that would have never happened. Yeah, I don't know. Well, last cycle, it didn't happen. So, what is your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, let's rewind back even like a year ago. I mean, I feel it's almost been a year. I really feel like since SNL has really ripped into podcasting, we're on season 3 of Only Murders in the Building, and it's not making fun of podcasting anymore. Meghan Markle's up on stage, not as a duchess or an actress, but a podcaster. That's the title she picks when she's keynoting at South by Southwest. You tell your parents you're a streamer or a YouTuber or an influencer, they roll their eyes. You tell them they're a podcaster now, and it has some weight. So I think that we pushed past the bro aspect of it, which is still there. And for some people it's valuable, and other people it's a cry for help. But like, I think that there's something really valuable in this space, and I think it's been very cool to see. I mean, I think sometimes I think that we are doing a disservice to our industry by focusing on the word podcasting being audio exclusive. I try to say it's audio forward and audio first. I think anything that wants to call itself a podcast is a win for us. But at a certain point, our $2 billion advertising industry, as podcasting is the word podcasting, might be easier to be the best part of influencer marketing or these other channels there, right? I think we need to reevaluate why we're so fixated on certain categorizations and just kind of follow the audience and the money. With that said, I mean, I think, when you think of influencer, when you think of Instagram and Reels and things like that, they're really transient. It's really quick. It's something that's skippable. When you think of YouTube, those YouTube shows, the overlap between a YouTube show and a podcast it's kind of one-to-one. I mean, most of them have both audio and video. Plenty of the ones that are just video also just call themselves a podcast, even if they don't have audio. And that's fine. I'm here for it. If I don't have to watch, but watching can augment it, but that's the only way. You want to call yourself a podcast? I'm not here to argue with you. So I think that there's more room for the conversation in podcasting, and people have realized that there's more room to have interesting stories, and people can ask interesting questions. Like I don't want to get into politics too much, but like the Theo Vaughn's interview of Trump was very interesting because he asked questions that CBS and NBC and all these other people aren't going to ask. Like they're just a different conversation. And the fact that that's like allowed, right? Like the PR team didn't say like, no, and we have to vet all of this. Like that's what's impressive to me. The reach is super cool. Looking at Rogan's reach, Oxford Road did ran some numbers and shared some data about that, like comparing it to like an NFL game. Right. And looking at just YouTube and then adding in like the podcasting data that we don't have and all that. Reach is massive for these things. And I think it's hard to look at Rogan and use that as an example because Rogan is like 5 to 7 times the next largest podcast. Right. But they're not just going on Rogan, right? They're going on other shows. They're addressing different audiences. It's exciting for me. I think the clickbait titles of like, this is the podcast election, are a little rough. But I think, like you said, the knee-jerk reaction, like dismissing the space, like I've spent my career listening to people who dismiss the space and it doesn't click until it's run them over, kind of, right? Until like your pushback and your hesitancy against it is just overrun by something that you can't argue with anymore. And it's there and it's interesting. And maybe we can't get everybody to listen to it. Maybe it's not as easy to get a new show out the door or get it greenlit or funded or anything like that. Sure. 53% of the US listens to a podcast or watches a podcast once a month. That's pretty cool.
It's a big deal, man.
Yeah.
It's the zeitgeist, I mean, it's, I think the authenticity, and I know this is preaching to the choir, but just, I like having these conversations because I want to know why, even though I'm in the middle of it. And sometimes I feel like you can't see the forest through the trees or what have you, but like the fact that you can have Trump on a Joe Rogan, a Theo Vaughn, and, it's the opportunity for authenticity to shine. I'm not endorsing anyone, certainly not. It's a matter of like, can you hold a conversation? It's maybe a more accurate way to describe podcasting would be just like deeper content or, of course, yeah, you have short form.
Bonus reel. It's the conversation that's not recorded, right? They just leave it rolling, right? Like you think about it, like these are the types of things that the people are talking about, but they're not recording, and now they are, right? Like I'm sure journalists, when they're getting to sit down with these people and are asking structured questions, are also asking other questions that they're asked not to publish and things like that. But in podcasting, it's rolling, right? It's funny because it's not streaming, so they could edit it, but like I think they get them to agree to it. Like again, like. I think it was really a powerful move for Trump to go on the Rogan podcast and go to Austin and do all those things. And like, it was disappointing to me as a liberal to see like Harris push back and say like, well, I'm not going to do it your format. I'm not going to come down there. And that was a massive miss in my opinion. Absolutely. And I think it shows like, when we buy into what the medium is, instead of trying to force it into something we want it to be, it can be really powerful. And when we push back on it, it can also be really powerful and sometimes not great ways.
Yeah. I wonder if her team thought that this would get out, that she wasn't willing to go to Austin and that whole thing. I wouldn't say it's like the biggest negative mark against her and the team. And I'm also very progressive myself. I mean, when Bernie went on Joe Rogan, I was there for it. I loved
Yeah.
it, like, because he obviously pulls no punches, and he's one of the most authentic one out there. So, I don't know. It doesn't have to be a whole political conversation. I'm feeling it today because we're recording this on election day. But
Oh yeah, today's brutal. I haven't drank in
crazy.
4 years. The fun of owning your own company, you realize if you're drunk at a work event, you're the only one who can save you. So I quit drinking when I did that, but now I'm just like, maybe a beer tonight? It's
Yeah,
definitely a tough day. But
it really
but yeah, I
is.
mean, but just to examine Rogan for a minute too, I don't even know if I would say that he is like really that great of a host anymore. Like I think he was, and I think he pushes things there, but I think what he is a showman. And I think he
Totally.
understands, and like even like Daily Wire and other people like that, right? These people that capture a specific audience, they identify and know their audience. And more importantly, they know who's not their audience.
Hmm.
And they're very smart about that. They're going after these people that are disenfranchised or don't find like are missing something, and they get it. And that's incredibly powerful. And in podcasting, you don't have to be for everyone. If you make a podcast that is for anybody 18 to 34, period, the end, it's for nobody, right? If you make a podcast that is going to exclude people, is that great? Maybe not if that's your goal, but like, is that great for the content to grow and to thrive and to find a home, find people that will buy into it? Yes. People want that. They want to, by identifying it, they can find more familiarity with it and buy into it. And I think that that's the shows that are succeeding are saying, this is our audience. And even when the content can be stale, or doesn't innovate, or doesn't, you know what I mean? Like it's kind of just the same old thing. They've got you in their loop. They've got you in that pattern and frequency and comfort and familiarity. Again, 2 kids, right? I listen to more D&D and video game podcasts than I play D&D and video games, right? I have 3 board games that are arriving this week from when I was buying my feelings on Kickstarter during the pandemic. But like, they're not going to get played. I might, while I'm unwrapping them to put back in my cabinet, I'll be listening to an actual play podcast that feels like being in a room with a bunch of friends.
Hmm.
This is like a really powerful medium. And I think that it hits some people, not at all. But I think for a lot of people, it's a companionship thing. It's a little less attention than an audiobook. It reminiscent of AM radio without 21 minutes of ads. It's got something for everyone. And that's what's really cool. I think that the biggest issue is we haven't found the best on-ramp for everyone. But YouTube is kind of proving that it might be it.
Yeah, no, I love kind of the way you're talking about it, because it makes me feel like it's like I never really got into Twitch, but I feel like podcasting is, to your point, maybe a less labor into like necessary medium. I mean, I say I got the idea to start this company, Next Chapter, when listening to the startup and putting together IKEA furniture when I was living in LA, and it was just this passive, exercise that I could also, kind of rewind if necessary if I missed some detail, but it was just very inspirational, the same breath. And I just wonder if maybe that kind of like the passive nature of it, but then also feeling like you're with the fly on the wall, and you're there for the conversation. You don't have to pick up every single detail
Yeah.
necessarily, but there's just something that's very comforting about that. And I remember when Joe Rogan was starting, I was at SiriusXM, and I remember it was just before I left that he was getting a show there because he had been on, I think, Opie and Anthony, so consistently. And then, but he was doing this kind of psychedelic thing. This something was like, you can't say this stuff. Even on satellite radio, I was very skeptical of, any
Yeah.
kind of like conversation about, drug use or anything like that. So for him to just go like double down on your niche is basically what he was able to convert into this huge audience. Took a lot of time. Not going to say it was overnight, but just that pure, authentic, like, this is what I'm about. And then, spun it off onto his own.
Have you ever seen the clip of him on Tom Green's web show? Right, like that, he was just like, it's awesome to watch because he's just like, this is amazing. Like you like don't have to worry about the cable channels. You don't have to worry about anything. You're putting it out yourself. Like, it's just wild. Some of those things that like spawned all this. Like we're very like these industries just popped up, right? This is such an interesting thing. There's no other mediums out there really that you can just be open distribution. That's why we're seeing closed platforms like YouTube pull away at it and cache it. Spotify starting to cache more as they do video and do streaming ad insertion, because people want to own pieces of it, right? The open nature of it is not attractive to many people who want to make money off of it. But the audience thing, the Twitch thing is really interesting because I think about it, I never fell into Twitch, and the same reason I struggle with Discord, because I don't have the time to be present in there when it's live. And if I'm missing it, it's like someone sending me a printout of a chat conversation, right? A part of the value is there. I think the showmanship of that aspect of Twitch or whatnot, you have to be a way better presenter. This is a good interview. We're doing great here. But the fun of podcasting is someone on your team could take this and rewrite the whole thing into scripts for us. And we could come out incredibly more polished, and there's no pressure. There's nobody watching this right now. But further, I think in podcasting too, it doesn't matter to me how many downloads this gets, because if you clip this on social and you share something that makes me and you look smart as a clip that I share, and you do the same thing, well, we've extended to our audience network. So even just making assets, even the extension and the relation and the highlighting of each other, so many facets of podcasting that are really exciting. I think becoming a top 10, top 20, top 100 podcast was easier at one point, but there's also substantially less listeners. But it's no harder now than YouTube, breaking into YouTube for success, Twitch, an independent book author. In fact, I think it might still be easier. But I don't know. I think the easy days are gone, but that doesn't mean it's not easier than other channels.
No, I really liked what you highlighted, and that's really the philosophy behind this show. Initially we talked to creators. Now we're more looking at the industry, try to understand it. It doesn't matter to me how many people are listening to this. I think it's always, and for clients, when I'm talking to them, it's about the right audience. It's about networking with folks. I get to have this conversation with you, and I become smarter. If the listeners do as well, if they're considering making a podcast, or they're making one and they want to make it better or understand the industry, then it'll benefit them. But you're so right that it's these clips that is really kind of the main goal, and then the opportunity to just be, to have a, hopefully not a entertaining conversation to others, but something that I will walk away having something to think about or have learned something. So I think that's the major benefit of this type of show. So
that's the hardest part in podcasting, is that advertising is a CPM nature, advertising, right? And the idea is that I'm going to buy a certain number of impressions for a certain dollar amount and ask the performer, I'm going to stop spending with you. And that's tough, because that says you have to be of a certain volume. It doesn't care about your audience. Your audience factors into, did you convert? Or if you're big enough, it's brands, right? Huggies is not going to say how many diapers did you sell? It's going to say, does your audience buy diapers? So these are, interesting factors to think about. But when you think about the individual podcasts and how they can represent themselves and how they can highlight themselves, if they can represent themselves, if they can find ways to fund it by someone covering their costs, another business or a client or something there, if this becomes a sales funnel for them, there's so many interesting ways that this can work. And I think that downloads are just an easy number to look at. CPM for advertising is an easy number to look at, but there are a substantial number of podcasts that I consume only as clips. And I share this because there are people who are like, wow, I got 1 million views on TikTok, but it didn't drive to downloads. It's okay, that person just said they want 1 minute from you. What's so bad about that? They're no less valuable. They want a minute. They're going to be there for the minute. Put the good minutes up there and be happy with it. You need to monetize it, throw an ad up there, or do something else. But don't be frustrated that they don't go where you want them to. It's wherever you get your podcasts. It's not wherever I want you to get my podcast. And that's the thing. So right. So there's the value in clips, the value in snippets, the value in it being a newsletter versus a blog post. We put out 6 issues of Sounds Profitable a day. There's a podcast version of each of them. We had about 10,000 people subscribe to the newsletter, 50% unique open rate. It's astounding. We had about 200 to 300 people listening to the podcast. I'm not convinced that it's not my mom listening to it 300 times a day. Very proud of her for being able to figure that out with different IPs and user agents. But at the end of the day, some people want to consume some content in different ways, and you need to be able to provide that content for them. And you need to be able to foster that audience wherever they are.
Just a couple more questions before we wrap up on the future of audio. So you got your prognostication Johnny Carson had on or whatever. Curious. I think we've talked about optimism. You can touch on that, but I guess let's talk about like more the questions the industry has still yet to kind of find an answer to. What still trips you up or roadblocks down the road here for podcasting?
We had the IAB Audio Leadership Summit a few weeks back, and it was really interesting. I think it was one of the healthier ones. We've had a lot of really good conversations, a lot of acknowledgement of the progress we made over the last few years instead of lamenting things. I think people are over the fact that like a download isn't a listen and an ad deliver isn't an ad impression and all those things. But it was really clear that the buyers that are looking to buy on bigger ways are looking for this data from podcasters to be in these bigger planning systems. Because the bigger the holding company or the brand, the bigger they use this planning system that has to take into account podcasting. And so I think the big question is, when are we going to spend as an industry to be in the places that we're being told we need to be in or we're being missed out at, instead of asking when are people going to spend with us so that we can afford to be in there. Cost of acquisition in podcasting, I think, is lower than a lot of other mediums. I think a weak handshake and a bad cup of coffee at Podcast Movement closes more deals than I would believe. I think, like before I started getting into this side of the space, we need to realize that other industries are doing really expensive things to get in front of people, that they're paying for integrations and partnerships and all these things to make sure that their data is presented in the way they want, in the place that they want. And so I think that the question is, when are we going to acknowledge that nobody is going to fund us to be where they want us to be, but they're waiting for us to be there of our own choice? I'd say that's the big question.
I love it. No, I think it makes a ton of sense. So our executive producer, Nick Kastner, he wrote a question. I'm curious. I don't think we addressed it yet. And I'll ask maybe both these questions together. It's, do you envision another podcast boom ever happening again? And maybe over the next few years, how do you think it might evolve? What might be different about podcasting?
Yeah, I mean, I think the IP address is the shakiest part of it. So if I think about it, right, I see tons of reasons why Spotify should cache everything. They tried to do it in 2018. We pushed back as an industry, but as they have their streaming ad insertion, which is in-app audio advertising, they're doing so well with music monetization, and they're pushing into video. The open RSS doesn't help them very much. We're seeing, them move away from those exclusive deals. We'll see if they renew and are interested in selling that inventory from these other partners outside of the Spotify ecosystem. But I see plenty of reasons for them to abandon the RSS feed and cache. And then the difference between YouTube caching and Spotify is Spotify probably will let you streaming ad insert your own ads into that inventory. But now you need to bake in your ad into YouTube, because very few people have the ability through an MCN or whatnot to serve their own dynamic ads into YouTube. Then you need to bake your ads into Spotify or use their streaming ad insertion, or then you need to bake your ads into the open RSS, the remainder of that, or do dynamic ad insertion. We didn't 3x the audience. And so what I see there is we're fragmenting it, right? Instead of having one place where you upload and it goes everywhere, you have to upload to 3 places and 3 different systems and reconciling it. And I think that's going to be a big challenge for this industry. And I think the best thing I can say there is lowest common denominator. I mean, if we move away from the IP address and some of those values there that are making us digital adjacent, but are giving us plenty of headaches, what we enter into a world is it's more like influencer, more like buying Instagram or YouTube influencer, all those other things where maybe there's not the same data signals, but we know it performs. Promo codes and vanity URLs help. There's other interesting things there. There's definitely room for attribution to figure out where it can shine. But the publishers, like I said, the publisher used to log in, set their ad insertion points, upload it everywhere, set a campaign, it runs everywhere. Now is logging into potentially 3 different paths. Mm-hmm. And we need to realize that no one's going to hire them 2 different teams to support them so that one per channel, it's going to fall to them. So we need to recognize that we might have to change how we sell things. I think the big challenge there is if Spotify caches, that's a big challenge to all the companies, public or funded, that are really focused on the IP address or hosting or other things there. But I think most companies in podcasting have a skill in growing it, or operational expertise, or sales support, or advertising as just like representing the inventory, that there's a pivotable path for everyone. So I think that there's still more disruption. I don't think it's going to be fun. I don't think there's a lot of room necessarily for someone bigger to come into the space. I mean, we've seen YouTube come in and take ask us to give it to them how they want, and we've all bought in. But I don't see like Google's attribution solution coming into the space, right? Like when people are moving away from IP address and Chrome and Safari and all these other solutions. So I think there are going to be changes. I think there's going to be some shakeups there, but I don't know. I think they're going to be more business focused, and the people who can adapt and see the writing on the wall, the people who can support multiple solutions and whatever the buyer wants are going to succeed the best. I don't see room for another boom. Yeah. Like I mean, as it is, I would call like if, yeah, I mean, but like, look, right now there are people who have nothing to do with podcasting. You can call what they do a podcast. There's ads out there where someone is just sitting like this talking, and it's on Facebook, and they pretend it's a podcast, right? So like, I think if you want to call about like cultural boom, yeah, I think we're there, but I don't think we're going to see massive dollars into it the same way. I think there's still room to expand. I want to see the streaming apps. Like this is something I say as often as I can. Imagine Netflix charging you $2.99 extra a month, and every time they cancel that trash show you really liked in season 2 that didn't have its closure, they give you a 6-episode audio drama to close it out. Sign me up. Everything that involved magic and werewolves, I loved it, and they were all canceled. And I just give me 6 more episodes with those people to finish the story, right?
It would cost them the less than 1 episode of video.
They could do it in a day. It's just a table read, right? Like that's the value of it. Henry Cavill, when he was doing Witcher, like let him just talk about Warhammer in between it or whatever, or let him talk about Warhammer now that there's a Warhammer show, right? Sure. We look at Zack Snyder, which did Rebel Moon, which very long movie, and then they in 2 parts, and then they introduced director cuts of both parts, and then they introduced like a 12-episode podcast that's not in the Netflix app. Why? Give me the option to listen to it, right? I can't walk down the street watching Succession, but I can listen to the podcast. And doesn't HBO Max benefit from me listening to the podcast in their app? Don't they get login data or things like that? So I think there's still so much room for expansion and disruption. I think what we call podcasting, if we focus on RSS and open distribution, I think that has peaked. I think we're past that, and I think we need to figure out what podcasting is, what audio first is, and there's a lot of room here. But I'd be shocked if we saw another $1 billion spent in the course of 1 to 2 years. But I'm thankful for Spotify doing that. I think they advanced our industry 5 years during a really rough time. Very few companies failed, right? Like if you remove that bump and decline, like you're still looking at steady year-over-year growth. It might not be multiples, but it's 5 to 15%.
No, these are some great ideas. I'm excited. Would it be strange and/or the coolest thing ever for me to join Sounds Profitable live on a recorded podcast?
I love that. I mean, look, the whole goal of Sounds Profitable is how do we connect as many people as possible? How do we grow this space? How do we help with consulting and live events, discounts for things, all of that? Like, my dream is we're at 185 partners. I want to be at 200, 300, 400. I want to help everybody in the space. I want to connect them. And there's, again, no upside. I have nothing more to sell but that partnership. I am a fan of the things the IAB is doing, and we are focused on helping them out there. But in the last 2 years, they've increased their rates by 5% every year, making them almost double the cost of working with us. And we really pride ourselves on that hands-on nature. So I'm incredibly flattered. You were the first person who's signed on live. And if there's anybody else who wants to talk about partnering, our goal is to grow this industry, and it doesn't matter the size of your company.
I'm looking forward to it. Be in New York next week, so maybe we can link up then. I think you already answered my final question, which is what I ask everybody, but I'm so curious about the pivot and or what the future holds for you. And I just have to ask you, what's your next chapter?
Yeah. So look, I'm 38 years old. I'm doing pretty well. I'm very thankful that, we don't have debt. We've saved pretty well. I've got 2 young kids. My wife is able to be home full time. With that in mind, I love what we're doing at Sounds Profitable. I think the podcast industry is ripe for companies and individuals to make slightly better than they've made before, be able to have control of their work-life balance, be excited about what they do and work with people they love. And then the gap between that and selling for millions of dollars is an ocean. It's something you'll drown in more than you'll make it to the other side. I'm safely on that side, right? Like there's been aspects of Sounds Profitable where we tried to build an education product. And I looked at it and I said, I'm uncomfortable with this because things change so rapidly. I don't want it to be there without me sharing it, right? And, we've lamented that Tom and I are often the product, right? I do the consulting calls with everybody. I'm on 8 hours of calls a day. I love it. There's nothing I love more than talking to people. That doesn't create a sellable company, but I'm 38, right? I have plenty of time until I retire. I'd like this to be my last job. And I'd like to work at this until podcasting doesn't exist or until I can pass this off and someone who's not another white male can take up the mantle of Bryan Barletta and keep things going. And I can just be a partner and an advisor on whatever's next, because it's a really fun space. But holy crap, I did not mean to start my own company and I was not prepared for it. So any entrepreneurial desire to do something else, nah. This is my big swing, and I'm glad it's working out, and I hope I can do it for a long time. And we only really can do it because of people and partners like yourself now, I can say, helping us make it happen.
Bryan, this has been such a fresh breath of air. Really have enjoyed this conversation on a heavy day, to be honest with you. I was like, can I do that? Should we postpone this thing again? No, we're going for it. And I feel like I just got another shot of espresso, double maybe, just talking to you. So thank you so much for joining me on Your Next Chapter.
Thanks for having me on here.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Your Next Chapter. I'm your host, JT. Our executive producer is Nick Kastner. This is edited by Justin Cortese, and we drop episodes bi-weekly. Please follow the show, and thank you for listening.